Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday Build. This is episode 1.29, and today we're going to be discussing the topic, Someone Makes Chalk, Why the World is One Big Group Project, featuring What the Dog Saw, Minor Geniuses, and You. So my name is Brittany Hernandez, and I am a lawyer. I'm also a veteran of the United States military, a founder and CEO. I have a master's degree in international film business. I'm also a gavel expert and their global ambassador to law schools. I also have my own academy where we have gavel certification courses and courses in things like Softer, Airtable, Go Full Page, and more. So I've done a lot of cool different things. I'm from San Diego, but I live in London now. We're going to go ahead and actually get started right away into our topic. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about Someone Makes Chalk, Why the World is One Big Group Project, featuring What the Dog Saw, Minor Geniuses, and You. So the reason I was thinking of this, so going back to kind of the inspiration for this particular talk, is twice a day, I try to go outside at least for 5 minutes just to walk around the block, get some air, because when you're working from home, it can be so often that you're just in this box. You feel like you're in this kind of bubble where it's just you and your computer alone. So I like to just kind of like get outside, get some air, walk around. And maybe about a week ago, I was out for a walk and I was just thinking about lots of different things. And I happened to notice that there was some chalk on the ground in front of one of the houses, and it was, like a little kid drawing a house and like a doll or whatever else. And I remember just having this very distinct thought, someone makes chalk. And it was just kind of this moment where I was just realizing that somewhere out there, and maybe somewhere in history as well, somebody was sitting down and thinking about how we might be able to write using this type of material. And so the person who, and all the companies that have now since then created chalk are thinking about pigment. They're thinking about concentration of color in pigment and how it will fit in somebody's hand. How long should it be? How thick it should be? How many colors should be in a particular package that somebody buys? What are the different use cases for this particular piece of chalk? Who are our target markets? Like, what do they need? How should we market to them? Like, how does it feel in your hand? How much gets on your hand? Like, all of these different questions. So when you think about the fact that someone makes chalk and someone thinks about this day in and day out, that's just really interesting to me. And it also reminded me of the fact that all of us have something that we can kind of obsess about and think about all the time. And that's how we become experts at something. And it goes along with the idea of having our genius zone, which I've talked about previously on this show, by Gay Hendricks. So he has 2 books. This is Gay Hendricks. He has a book called The Big Leap. And then he has another book, which is, actually I have this one. I actually have this one on Kindle. So he has a book called The Big Leap, which is great and talks about your genius zone. And he also has another one called The Genius Zone. So let's go over here and find. Yeah, here we go. So this is The Big Leap, and then this one's The Genius Zone. And so in this Big Leap, he talks about how there are 4 zones. There's let me just kind of find this section here. So he talks about this like zone of genius, for example. And basically, the reason why I'm kind of connecting these things together is the fact that for someone out there in the world thinking about chalk every day and how we can expand the use cases or change them to be something that is used by kids, and then also when they're grown-ups, and then in this format and then that format, and how it interacts with the blackboard, and whether it's visible from certain distances, and all of these different pieces and questions means that that person who's, in that space is likely living within their genius zone if they enjoy it, if it's something that they can spend all day doing and not get tired and all these different things. So I just find that really fascinating. And the idea then that this is why the world is one big group project comes down to the idea that there isn't enough time for each of us to think about everything as much and in as much depth as the people who are going to be an expert about that thing, because we all have 24 hours in the day. So if I go away and I focus all of my energy and attention on a very particular thing, then that means that we need someone else. So let's say that I make chalk and I'm focusing all of my energy and attention on chalk, which can then facilitate a lot of other things, and we'll get back to that. Then I need someone else to go and focus on being an expert in maybe a very particular aspect of copyright law. Or I need someone else to go and be an expert in some very particular type of medicine because my energy and attention and focus is on chalk. So it's just kind of interesting because when you think about this, it's kind of beautiful and amazing because it means that we all have a place in this world to be what's called minor geniuses in different places. So I got this phrase minor geniuses from this book called What the Dog Saw by Malcolm Gladwell, which I'm reading for my book club right now. And I haven't finished it yet, but I've read a couple of chapters or listened to a couple of chapters on Audible that have been amazing. So obviously Malcolm Gladwell is an exceptional writer who's written books like Blink, The Tipping Point, Talking to Strangers, David and Goliath, and so on and so on and so on. So this idea, though, of What the Dog Saw is this idea where he talks about different perspectives, and then he goes into different adventures of what he calls minor geniuses. So for example, he goes from the one idea of like what the dog saw in particular is he gives the example of Cesar Millan, who is called the dog whisperer. Let me find the dog whisperer. So this is him here, Cesar Millan. So he is really interesting because where he was raised, he was known as the dog boy. And so his story is kind of fascinating, and he kind of the book goes into some different scenarios where he was like helping to establish the right balance within a home where there's an owner who's having troubles with their dog because their dog's being maybe like aggressive towards other people or other dogs or to them or whatever else. But what's interesting about that particular chapter about him talks about this idea of what the dog saw, and it goes into Cesar Millan's body movements as well as his how he's moving with the dog, almost like a dance. And so what's interesting about that as well is you kind of have this kind of interesting mix of different experts kind of coming together even just to tell the story. So you have Cesar Millan as the subject of the story, and he is the one we're kind of following in the story. But then you have the expert writer, Malcolm Gladwell, who's talking about the story, and he's in his genius zone in doing that. Then you have Cesar Millan doing his thing in that. But then you also have the other element of a movement expert who comes in and watches a recording of, I think it was like one of the episodes of the show, and she's evaluating his movement without any sound. So she's just watching how he holds himself, how he moves. And I just thought that was really interesting because she breaks down the fact that he's moving almost a bit like, not like a dancer, but he's aware of his body in an unconscious way or even a conscious way that is like how a dancer is. And it makes it to where what the dog sees is someone who is not there to like threaten them or hurt them. And so they also go into like dog experts talking about how they are very, very in tune with human like facial expressions, body movement, and they're constantly studying us as humans to understand what our moods are and what's happening with us. So they'll even pay attention to whether our eyes are dilated or not, or like the perspiration, or all these different elements they will pay attention to. So I just think that's really interesting, because it shows this, even just the chapter itself shows the coming together and mix of all these different people's lives as they kind of went through their own individual journeys to get to that moment where this all came together. But each person is evaluating and coming at it from a different angle. And there's stuff that we can draw from this particular kind of idea. And one of the other stories he tells in the beginning is around someone who invented like the Veg-O-Matic and had like a whole company and suite of like kitchen gadgets, like an indoor smoker, and how that person spends, hours and hours and stays up all night, having 4 different versions of an indoor smoker, putting a chicken into each one, and then turning them on at the same time. And then when they're done, going through and taste testing which one came out the best. So it's just the idea that we all can, and he called these people minor geniuses, and the fact that they're fully obsessed with this particular thing that makes it to where they're able to really pull out and really hone down the very essential elements of each of their different inventions or their different subject matter and become that sort of like expert. So I just find that this is a really interesting book. I highly recommend it. And I think it really lends itself to us learning that we are part of this ecosystem in the world where we each need to play a different role. So that's why it's always interesting to me when people say like, oh, from their background or upbringing that their parents were pushing them to be like doctors and lawyers. But if we all were only doctors and lawyers, we wouldn't have people making chalk or teaching us how to interact with our pets, or we wouldn't have anyone building our homes, because we wouldn't have people who are construction workers, or we wouldn't have electricity because nobody's thinking about that problem. So the idea here is that we have enough people in our society now, that when spread across, that we can all spend time thinking about different things and then helping each other in our society as one part of one big group project. And I think that this is really well spoken about in an article or a blog post by Kelly Deals, which I found through the podcast by Lauren Curry called Upfront Moment. So in her first season, she had an episode called How to Be a Gentle, Imperfect Activist. And this is a really, really good one. And she references Kelly Deals' article, How Not to Get Swamped by It All. And this is a very beautiful piece of writing that is, it's really interesting because it's the idea that we all have a place at the wall. So what she talks about here, and it's so interesting because it was so impactful, but it's a lot shorter than I thought. But this is from September 27th, 2020 by Kelly Deals. I'm not going to read the whole thing, obviously, but just to pull out a few things. So she says here, like, we pick up our tools and our spots on the wall and we show up. And she kind of goes into how things like our oppressive culture or systemic oppression or all these different things, things that we're trying to change feel like a massive 1,000-foot cement wall. And that she's saying, like, I'm not a rock climber, I'm not a soldier, I'm not an engineer, I don't own any sticks of dynamite. The usual methods for getting over that wall or blowing it up are not available to me, but I do have tools. I do have something to contribute. So this is kind of the overall takeaway I want you to have from this particular conversation, is that what you have to bring to the wall or to the table is valuable, and it doesn't have to look the same as somebody else. And we have time and we have enough people for you to really invest in becoming very good at something. And this is something I didn't really like understand or believe up to this point in my life in the past 2 years. is that it's okay to let a couple of other things go to be really good at something else. And I'll go back to that in a second. But she says something like, I can use my chisel, my writing, my connecting the dots analysis, my self-development and business development work with clients. I can pick my spot on the wall. And that's kind of like this niche. I can pick my spot on the wall, which in her case is the intersection between culture and marketing, aka the female lifestyle empowerment brand and culture making. She can show up at her spot, she can take her chisel, and she can pick away at the spot again and again. Now, she was saying, like, if I did this myself, I'm doomed to failure. I would make a tiny hole, but it wouldn't come down. But she's not alone. And so this is where this idea of a group project comes in. She says, other people, you are showing up with their tools and taking their spots on the wall too. So this here is like the main point of this article that I think is so beautiful, that really illustrates what I wanted to kind of take away in this particular conversation, which is some people are showing up with barbecues and bread. Some people are twisting balloon animals for the kids and for the kid in me, because I love a good fate. Musicians are keeping us all uplifted and inspired and soothing us when we're tired. The massage therapists are kneading sore muscles and preventing injuries. There are people singing and stilt walking. There are artists painting what it looks like on the other side of the wall. We can't imagine, but they can. And that keeps us going and painting all of us so we don't forget the power and magic of this moment. There are people setting up tents and others making sure the elders are laughing and loved and taking their meds on time. The accountants are making sure we've got coins in the coffers for the next supply deliveries. Someone's coordinating those deliveries and logistics and making sure we've got enough. So I actually am getting like a little bit emotional because and it says we've got enough porta potties. And it's making me emotional a little bit because I just find this idea so beautiful. And I love the idea that, like, even if we're not the ones that are actually touching the wall and making a particular type of impact, that we still can have an impact by supporting those people in our roles as we can. So I just find this really interesting, and I wanted to kind of highlight these ideas because sometimes it can feel hard to show up every day for our particular role in society and in the world. But if we remember that we are one piece of a larger puzzle, it can make that less hard and less scary, and we can really invest and throw ourselves into that. And there are some examples I wanted to show you of this, which are kind of from around chalk, which I think is fun, and also how things that start one place will influence and take people to another place. So let's use the example of chalk, for example. So this is how, this is one example of a chalk making industry, or a place that makes chalk. So they go through this process of like how they do it. So they have this step where they first have to grease or oil the molds. Then they put in water, then they put in this powder, and then they put it through like this into these different molds. They let it sit, I think only for 15 minutes, if I remember correctly. Let me see. Yeah, after 15 minutes, then they take them out and they start to put them like this, where they kind of like shake them so they will loosen up a little bit. And then they start to open them up and take them out. So I just thought this was so interesting. I had never actually like thought about the process of making this before, but I just thought it was interesting to see this process. So anyway, so this is just to say, so this is one part. So this person who is in the video doing this, and then if you go back even further, the person who first thought of how to make chalk, and then you fast forward that to this, then you fast forward that to how these might be used. So they then show you like all of the many like piles of these different pieces of chalk, and then also like in the different colors and stuff. So we have them in these different palettes, and then they have them in like different colors and stuff. It's just super cool. So I just thought that was interesting, because then maybe these pieces of chalk will then go on to help teach children how to pronounce their letters. So a teacher will be up in the classroom with a blackboard in some area of the country, or in some area of the world, and be writing the letter A and having people shout it back out. And then a student comes up and they are going to trace this letter as well. And so from one invention, let's say of chalk, for example, to employment of the person who makes it and them being able to practice within their zone of genius, or, to support their families, at least at the base. Then from that to having that be in the hands of a teacher who then gets to put that into the hands of a child who then learns how to write their letters and their numbers or whatever else. And then for them to go on, and that played a part in their life and in their role. And also, if you go back in that particular child's life a little bit earlier, maybe they're using chalk to write and draw on the floor. And to kind of take that thread around writing on the floor, you can see that there's a really interesting artist that's featured in this Wired video, and that's called How This Chalk Artist Creates Illusions on Pavement. So his name is Kurt Wenner, and he's a former NASA illustrator, which he makes these really, really, really interesting and beautiful pavement art with chalk. So look here, you can see it's all about perspective. So he kind of breaks down his process in this particular video, how he was able to make this one, for example, which then actually later, well, maybe not this one, but there's another one. But he takes chalk and he plans this out on a piece of paper that has a grid. And then he has this whole process for how he makes sure he can understand how somebody would be looking at it from a particular perspective. So he has this whole method of lining up where things would go, where the picture should go, and then which block things should go and at what sizes. And he actually does a live demonstration of pavement art with chalk. And in this particular section, he actually talks about the chalk that he uses, which is actually kind of interesting.
Can demonstrate his creative process on a smaller scale.
This is freehand drawing, and there would almost never, in any case, be a trace on the pavement. The different containers are handmade pastels that you can buy, whereas
he says that there's a mix of the chalks that you can buy and then chalks that he actually makes himself. And then he goes into a little bit why, so I'll play that part here.
Pavement. The kind of chalk I'm drawing with is a commercial chalk that you can buy, whereas the other chalks you see in these different containers are handmade pastels. I do make them myself. Nobody makes a pastel where the pigment content is 100%. I just wanted the colors to be stronger and blend less. So my pastels are made with pure pigments, which means they're the powdered color, the oxides or the chemicals that make the color are the entire content of the pastels. Whereas when you buy a pastel or a chalk, it's about 30% of the content.
There you go. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make here, is that so he's been doing this for so long and doing these different iterations and testings of how things bleed together, or how the pigments hold, that he's seen why he wouldn't want to use one and why he would make his own, and how he would do that, and molding them and coming up with the pigment content and understanding the differences between them and so on. But this is what he is thinking about every day. And he actually has a part where he says that, they ask him in the interview somewhere around here.
I'm 64 years old.
Yeah, this is it exactly. So he says, they ask him how long have you been thinking about this?
How much time have I spent in life thinking about this?
How much time in life have I spent thinking about this?
I think I've spent my entire life thinking about this, starting from when I was 8 years old. I'm 64 years old, so that puts me at well over half a century that I've been thinking about these problems. Is this similar?
So that's exactly it as well, which is that he says, he's been thinking about this for his whole life since he was 8 years old, and now he's 64. And so for well over half a century, he's been thinking about these very specific problems, which are, how do I make sure that this pigment stays where I need it to stay for pavement art with chalk? or how much percentage of pigment do I need to have, or how do I make it to where this illusion shows this aspect when somebody is standing from here. How do I use, he says that he got his dad recognized when he was young that he was interested in art, and he got him a book called The Geometry of Art, I believe. Let me find this book here. He says, maybe it's over here. Let me just see. It was just really interesting because it just shows how everything builds on top of each other. You can start at one place, learn something. He then spent time, as mentioned, as an illustrator at NASA, and then later started to do pavement art with chalk. And then now he does this at this really large scale. This is what I was saying about how he comes up with this method of finding ways to position
These lines and position
art to be exactly at a particular scale. So if somebody is standing at a particular perspective, they would be able to see what they need to see, and how it only works from a particular perspective. Oh, okay. So it's actually this part over here. He talks about how his dad got him this book.
My father saw that I was interested in art. He was a mathematician and scientist. So he gave me this little paperback book called The Geometry of Art and Life. And this little book described how geometry is used both in art and by nature. And so that book fascinated me.
So yeah, I just love that part because it just shows kind of like how everything comes together, and also the encouragement from a young age by a caretaker of this kind of innate interest and talent, and how having the foundation of geometry can be added on by the invention of chalk, which can be added on by innate interest and nature, and all these pieces fit together to propel this person forward into a career where they are delighting and inspiring people through their incredible pavement art. So for example, this was, he said,
Position of the viewer and making the work
I don't think this was the, well, I think this was
accurate from that position, rather than composing the work as if it were a wall painting. It was a little bit strange because the first piece where I looked at it and I said, oh, this is a new art form, this never existed before, was the Dies Irae piece.
So this was actually, yeah, the first one he did that he felt like was an art piece. But if you can see here, it looks like it's coming out of the floor, but it's actually flat. So it's just kind of amazing how, and actually he did this, I think it took him 6 weeks, and he did it without the method that he later came to. So just kind of like so interesting how this all came together. But this is that idea that everything kind of comes together to support and provide the foundation and backbone for someone else's journey, taking that piece, adding it with another piece. So we have the element of chalk, we have the element of math and geometry, we have the element of inspiration from nature, we have a platform and resources, we have his experience from NASA, his innate interest, and so on, and his natural abilities as well as his honed abilities to come together to this point where he can delight and inspire people from all over the world to come and see this incredible artwork. And looks like this, for example, and some of these other amazing pieces. So I highly recommend watching this Wired interview with him here, which kind of illustrates that point as well. So there's another piece here that was around candy making that I thought was really interesting. And then also this last piece about chalk, I'll do first. So the other one was about this chalk piece is really interesting. This one's about,
I recommend using Fiverr, but you get work done cost.
This one is about why the world's best mathematicians are hoarding chalk. And it talks about a very particular type of chalk, which is a Japanese brand called Hagoromo. and how they were at one point going to go out of business, and then they were bought by a Korean company, which was saved. But during the time that they heard that the company was going out of business, all of these mathematicians started to buy like hundreds of boxes of chalk and like hoarding them in their offices, and like doing trades and like selling it, and they're becoming like chalk dealers and all this stuff, because this is, in the math world, like the best chalk brand that they use. So anyway, this is really fascinating, but it kind of goes to that point that I was making earlier, when we watched the first video around how the chalk was made in that particular region, which is that's the starting point. So there was like all of these different things that led up to someone creating this version of chalk, or the style and use case for it. And then from there, we're able to take that invention and apply it in a way that makes it to where mathematicians are then working out and solving problems that maybe help us put, a man on the moon, and help us to teach future generations of students how to solve different types of problems that then will launch us into some next iteration in the future, and kind of add on to these different pieces. Lastly, I just wanted to quickly talk about this really fascinating way that people make a particularly kind of hard candy. So this is a really interesting video on how to make rock candy. And it's this store, I actually don't know where they are, but it's this whole handmade process for how to create candy in this particular style, where it's the ones that have the little writing and they're like in a little circle. And so it's these ones here. So this one video goes through how it's made by hand by this person here. So it goes through each stage, and they make this bespoke candy for the show. But so you see how they have like a little heart or like a little writing and stuff. So they show how they actually were able to make that, starting from the beginning. And I just find the whole process super fascinating, because this has a lot to do with, in this particular section of the video, it talks about how sugar was kind of invented, or not like invented, but like kind of discovered and distilled so that it could be used.
So every letter is hand delivered by a master.
Let's see.
Whether it's the traditional stick of rock or its bite-sized candy offspring, the starting point for all rock candy is sugar, which is added to water and brought to the boil. The candy needs to be flexible so it can be shaped, but this mix will be rock hard as soon as it cools. The solution is a measure of glucose syrup, which gives the candy an elastic texture, so it can be stretched and worked. Pavel leaves the bucket in.
Well, there's a part here, I must have missed it, but there's a part that talks about how sugar was like kind of pulled out like 2,000 years ago or something. I can't remember the exact dates and stuff. Maybe it's here.
The sugar solution is sweet.
Well, anyway, and so anyway, this is kind of like that idea that somebody paid attention enough to notice that this is how you can turn like sugar cane into like a crystallized form that makes it to where we can then turn it into sort of something sweet and like a candy. And then that was later built upon by this whole industry around candy. Then we have candy makers who are making this by hand. And then a particular style of candy that is like a hard candy. And in this case, he goes through all of the different kind of chemical components that you have to consider when you're making this very particular thing, which is like the fact that you're constantly working against the clock, because you need to keep the sugar and the solution warm for a period of time. So they also incorporate this pan that has like a beeswax layer over it, and then they pour it onto that. And they also have to put a solution in it to make sure that it doesn't set too quickly. Then they go in and give it certain colors in a certain shape. Yeah, this is the beeswax part. This is the coloring part here, where they have to put it in certain places because this is going to be the middle And they need that to be certain things. So they're constantly, if they get it wrong at any point, they have to scrap the whole thing and start again. And this powder that they're putting here is what makes it to where the middle part won't like get hard too fast. It's like a non-toxic solution that helps to keep it more like gooey for a while. They even go through this whole process of later having to hand stretch this piece and this candy like through this hook. And then they also go through and they couldn't, so this is a really fascinating part. So they talk about how like these little words on here, so it says, how do they do it with a question mark? So they talk about how you wouldn't be able to like make this really tiny writing and you wouldn't want to have to do it through like every single piece. So what they do is they actually make it in a very big form first.
Becomes harder to work.
So
that's our enemy, the temperature, and
that's what they're talking about, how they're always like working against the clock. So they actually make these letters big first, like this.
Pavel is a master of the candy alphabet, but we've thrown him a curveball.
He has to make they want him to make a question mark.
I've never done a question mark before, so let's try it.
So they make it like this. If, like I said, if they get it wrong, they have to start over. But he makes the question mark big first, like this.
With the other...
So you can see it here and the little dot at the end. And then what happens is they take that and they stretch it.
Mistakes will not be tolerated.
So they pack it like this, and then they roll it into a cylinder. And if they get the cylinder wrong, they also have to start again. So here we say, how do they do it with a question mark? That's going to be the middle piece.
As it cools, it starts to set. But if it doesn't set
They
as a
roll
cylinder, the whole batch will be ruined. So Agata constantly rolls the candy to retain its shape.
Right. Then after this part, this is really interesting. They wrapped it now in the next color, or the next colors.
Huge piece of candy now, so it's very heavy, as you can tell.
So they go from here
The lump weighs almost 16
and stretch
kilograms.
it and twist
Far too
it.
big to eat. It needs
Like
to
this.
be thin sticks with words through each one. So they stretch it by hand until the letters shrink from 3 centimeters tall to just 1 millimeter.
Wow. I just think that's so amazing.
Creating up to 40 sticks of rock
There you
in
go.
the process.
So they create all these different sticks of rock. So now they have these little pieces, and then they go through and they cut them against this like block thing and make the little pieces.
Next
I'll
up,
show you
the chopping
this
block,
part here.
where the sticks are sliced into
And now they're like
mouth-watering,
these little
bite-sized
ones.
delights.
Let's say, how did they do it?
Complete.
So I just thought that was so cool. But throughout this whole video, what you can see is all of the different elements that came together and all the different things that are in the mind of the candy maker here, where they've had to consider every single step along the way and every single part of the process, and to not get any of those parts wrong. So I just think that what we can pull away from this as well is not only that we can have this level of expertise in something, but also that it's like, it's okay that you're focusing on this thing while other people focus on something else. So we have somebody who is focusing, like I said, on making candy and having the little letters. And it's okay for you to go and spend your time in your life and like your expertise thinking about how to make chalk. And in my case, that's how to use Gavel and integrate it with other tools, or how to create no-code solutions, or how to help other people learn how to do that. So for me, I want to focus on and spend my time on learning how to use different pieces of software and how they mix together. And it's okay for me to focus on that. And that was actually something that I had a really hard time with at first, because it means that I don't have as much time to focus on a lot of other areas of what I thought I was going to be an expert in the future. So there's parts of me that are having to just allow to go away, to focus my time, energy, and attention on this other thing. So I find that really fascinating, that in a way we need to make a couple of choices about what we're going to focus our attention on. And it really requires you to know yourself really well, and to allow yourself to be really in tune so that you can focus on the things that you can become a really deep expert at. And it should be something that you obsess about and makes you happy, like we saw with the gentleman who had the amazing drawings here. which I'll just pull up his name really quick so that I can reference him, Kurt Wenner. So like Kurt Wenner, where he was saying that he's been thinking about this since he was 8 years old, and he's 64 now, and he's spent his life like kind of thinking about and perfecting and coming up with his own tools and creating and molding his own chalk and his own style and trying something and failing at something and having the time and space to do that. I think that would obviously be the ideal. And I always want to like recognize that this conversation of having a choice in what you do comes from privilege, and the fact that we can make a choice about what we can do in the world, whether because of our gender. We're not discriminated against in certain areas of the world because of our gender, and we have maybe the means to have a laptop, to have a camera, to have a microphone, to have internet, to have all of these different pieces that I could even pull up to show you and to stand in a position to say. So I recognize that that's coming from a place of privilege, and not everyone has that, but also to say that maybe we can use that power, and this is something that Lauren Curry talks a lot about in Upfront Moment as well, is that we can use that power and that time and that privilege to then help others who are in a position that is less fortunate than ourselves. And we can use that to, let's say, increase access to justice. So maybe I can use my skills to help come up with a way for the people who don't have those things to still have access to lawyers, for example. And I can use my time, my talent, my skills, and my background to think about those problems, to talk to those people, to help understand how we can find better solutions for those people. So I just find this a really fascinating conversation. I hope it was interesting for you as well. And as I mentioned, this has been a conversation that I think about a lot. If you have any questions, I love talking about this stuff, so feel free to reach out. I'm just going to leave you with a few announcements. So this has been an episode of the Wednesday Build, which has new episodes live every Wednesday. I'm also putting out a new issue of Code Word Hex every Tuesday, along with the Tuesday Forecast newsletter. We also have Gavel certification courses at Chromium Academy, and we have just launched for pre-order the new Gavel Silver with Brittany course. So if you'd like to join us, you're welcome to join us for core cohort number 4, which is coming up on August 10th. Well, the silver week is going to be August 10th, but basics week starts on August 3rd. So you're welcome to join us. And that's going to go for 4 weeks. So we do basics week first, then we do silver, then we do gold, and then we do our test out. So you're welcome to join us. You can pre-order that now. You can also just order the bundle, which has basic, silver, and gold in it, or you can just use the test out course as well. So we have also courses in things like software and Airtable. Go Full Page has a certification course as well, with more to come. And in buying each of these different courses, you also get access to our community. We also have a very active Slack group for the Gavel community, so feel free to join us there as well. So as I mentioned, this has been an episode of the Wednesday Build. Next Wednesday, July 26th, we'll be talking about a topic called What is a Harmonized Ecosystem? How to create tightly aligned and auto-synced systems. So this is going to feed into the conversation around that piece of the silver course, because that is really focused on how Gavel integrates within your harmonized ecosystem. So I go over things like Softer, HubSpot, Clio Manage, I go over Zapier, I go over Gavel, I go over Stripe, I go over all these different tools and how they fit together in this one big puzzle. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or via email at brittany@chromium.pro. You can also email me at brittany@gavel.io for any inquiries related to Gavel's law school program. So thank you so much for being here. It was so nice to see all of you that are with me live. And for those of you that are on the recording, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye, everyone.